Welcome to a special online edition of To the Contrary, a weekly discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, we'll be talking about the women's vote as we head into the final stretch. Joining me today are Linda Chavez, chair of the Center for Equal Opportunity, Anushay Hossain, an independent journalist, Atima Omara, Democratic strategist, and Carrie Lukas, head of the Independent Women's Forum. Welcome, everybody. How are you?
Great.
Great.
All right. Very good. All right, let's get right to the women's vote. In some key places, Carrie, President Trump is losing by 2.5 to 1 the white suburban women's vote to Joe Biden. And of course, he made that, let's face it, fairly pathetic comment about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, saying, white women, suburban women, please like me. Did that work?
I don't think so. I think the president is much stronger when he focuses on policy issues, because actually one of the interesting things is kind of a disconnect is that women in general tend to be pretty happy with how the policies the president has put forth. Women did have the lowest unemployment rate before COVID hit and kind of knocked everyone around the world. Women had the historic low unemployment rates. Wages were finally rising for Americans of all stripes, and particularly women. Women were starting businesses, so women had a lot to celebrate. But obviously, when it comes to the president, it depends. For a lot of women, it's going to depend. The choice is, they might is personality versus policies. A lot of people really like his policies and what he stands for and the agenda he's put forth, but then are obviously uncomfortable with some of the rhetoric he offers. So that's the question facing a lot of women. What's more important to them?
Anushay, is that the way Democratic suburban women see the race?
I think the question is, who are suburban women and what is Trump's idea of suburban women? We know that in 2016, it was the college-educated white women that really gave Trump the winning edge. But the question now is, who does he think these suburban women are? I mean, I think Trump is very much still imagining this Leave It to Beaver situation where he can, stoke the fears of white American suburban women by saying that, people of color in low-income housing are going to come into your picket fence neighborhood. So I think the question is, who exactly is he talking to, and who is he imagining this voter bloc as?
Linda Chavez, your thoughts on this?
Well, first of all, I think it's more than personality. I agree generally with what Carrie is saying, but I wouldn't describe it as a personality problem that Donald Trump had. I would present it as a character problem. And I think what women are reacting to is not just the kind of bullying that he engages in, and he just does it on a routine basis. He was much better in the debate this week than he was before, but he still seems to want to dominate. And I think that's a problem. But more fundamentally, he lacks empathy, and he has a problem with honesty. And I think women in particular react to that. And Anushay is absolutely right. White college-educated women were willing to go with him last time, and they show every sign this time of fleeing him in hordes.
Atima, what's interesting to me, I'd like your thoughts on white suburban women and educated women are deserting Trump like crazy. I read a quote in Politico where a woman interviewed in Pennsylvania said, I voted for him last time. Boy, did I make a mistake. Mm-hmm. But he's not losing. He has higher Hispanic support this time than he did the first time, and African American support around the same levels that he had in 2016. So why is it that white women predominantly in the suburbs, are deserting him, and yet men of color or people of color are sticking with him in the same proportions?
Well, I think I have to look a little bit more at the numbers and who's supporting him and who's not. Certainly, Black women are by and far 85% of sort of those polled are going in the direction of Biden. That's not surprising.
Right.
But
90%, actually 80% overall of African Americans are supporting Trump. Last time Hillary got 90% of the I'm sorry, 80% are supporting Biden, 20% are supporting Trump. But last time he got 10%, and Hillary Clinton got 90% of the Black vote.
So there's a cumulative. I want to address the women's gender gap, and then I'll talk roughly about. But that's a accumulation of Black vote. But certainly he's been peeling off and working very hard to peel off Hispanic men, Black men. So when you look at Black people overall as a voting bloc and Hispanic voters overall as a voting bloc, yes, the numbers for him are more favored because of that men differential of Black male and Hispanic voter support. But with women, overall, Black women, Hispanic women overwhelmingly prefer Biden to Trump. And then when you actually, the most interesting numbers I've seen and where he has been in the most in trouble, and I'm curious as to why he hasn't actually leaned more into kind of getting them back, is working class white women voters. Now, that's the non-college educated white woman, and they were with him last time. And some of those Pennsylvania women voters, especially in the western parts of Pennsylvania, that's that demographic that is saying, like, I voted for him last time, not doing it this time. In the state of Michigan, there was like a 52-45 preferential to Biden of this working class white women vote. And there's a lot of speculation as to why that might be. Some of it is very much turned off by the lack of empathy and the lack of honesty. How he treats women has just become sort of a pattern that they've now recognized over the last 4 years and are pretty tired of it. But also, this is a base that's working class white women that are heavily affected by COVID in ways that Black and brown women are. And that is their husbands are working, their families are, and sometimes themselves are working jobs that are exposing them to COVID. They are the school teachers, they are the bus drivers, the healthcare workers. They're all of these folks who are getting affected much more easily. They're working in bars, they're owning small businesses, and they're seeing these effects and they're seeing the mismanagement of it. There was one story I was really struck by. It was a Pennsylvania woman voter who works a call center. And what she does is she literally directs the calls to the different, like for healthcare. So she was like, I knew that the president was lying about the impact of COVID because I was getting the calls directing him to the funeral home from people who died from COVID. The people who were, having emergency calls because of COVID. She's like, I knew anecdotally that he was not being correct about the impact of COVID early on because of my job. And she's a working class white woman. So I think that's where he should be most concerned, if anything, is that the core base of working class voters and of that non-college educated white women are actually also leaving him in droves the same way that white suburban women are.
I wonder if Trump's doing as well as he did last time with African Americans, or maybe a little better and way better with Hispanics, although certainly not anywhere near the majority of Hispanic support, is that people of color are slowly but surely making their way into the middle and upper classes, and that ever since Lee Atwater, during President Reagan's tenure, when you were in the White House, Linda, said that the Republican Party is the big tent. Is it becoming at least a slightly bigger tent? Well,
I actually think that a lot of this is, we're talking about this as if there's only, this is just a referendum on Trump. And I think that in many ways, that's how certainly the Biden campaign has tried to make this a referendum on Trump, as has most of the media. But I also think that there's a lot of African-American women and Hispanic women, and, a lot of folks are looking at really what seems a much more extreme version of the Democratic Party. When you do have calls to defund the police, you look at the polls on this whole call to defund the police, overwhelmingly African Americans oppose. They want the police funding to stay the same or to increase. And majorities of women want that. And I think that there are a lot of people who have seen cities burn. Again, this isn't being covered very much by the media, but there are people who are seeing their own backyard some of the violence and are concerned about safety. I also think we should just, it's interesting. I feel like here we are talking about the polls and feeling, as if we're really confident about what the behaviors of women voters based on some of these polls. Let's just remember that in 2016, I feel like we were all here, and I know I was thinking that this was that Hillary had this 100% in the bag, and the polls are very, very close to exactly where we were in 2016. If you look at the battleground states, Trump is doing a little worse in the overall national vote. But I think it's, we need to be a little cautious that we don't know how, especially in today, where we now see in the last 4 years, people who lose their jobs based on a comment that they make on Facebook. Would I tell a pollster that I supported Donald Trump if they called me on the phone? Would I trust that? No way. I wouldn't think so. So I think there could be a lot of people out there who might not be giving the directions. You might be shaking your head, but I think we should be a little bit cautious about whether or not we actually what we know and don't know. Maybe you all are right, and it's going to be a bloodbath for Trump in terms of women. But I think we should be a little bit more humble about what we are so certain of.
Okay,
I'm just like talking about numbers here, and quite frankly, there's plenty of white voters who've talked to the media and don't want to give their names and said, "Look, I'm voting for Biden. My whole neighborhood don't know that, because if I did, I would be penalized by my social circles for voting for Biden." So it could, I don't want to say it goes both sides, but I'm saying that that's also a reality.
Well, if you look at what happens on social media, it obviously doesn't go to both sides. It's the right that pays the big price, but that's fine.
I just wanted to get in here and mention one other big demographic that is not going for Trump that went for him last time. That's a big problem, and that's senior voters.
Yes.
And I think, seniors, again, it's all about COVID. And Carrie, I agree with you that there hasn't always been the best coverage in terms of what's going on in some of the cities. And I think there has been a tendency to play down some of the disturbances, which I've seen in Colorado, when I went into the downtown streets of Denver and saw the kind of damage that really was done, it was pretty horrifying. But the fact is, Joe Biden is not for defunding the police. And in fact, what he wants to do is to give more money, different kinds of money, more money for training, for de-escalation, et cetera. So I think that makes it a little bit harder to make that case. And with respect to Hispanics, I wrote a book now. It was in 1991. So how many years ago is that? That's, 30 years ago, about Hispanics moving into the middle class. And even at that time, more and more Hispanics were trending Republican. And you had Ronald Reagan, who got somewhere between 40 and 45% of the Hispanic vote. And in fact, Hispanics have traditionally been much more split in their votes than, for example, the African-American community. Richard Nixon got a third of Mexican Americans voting for him in 1972. So
George W. Bush got 45%.
Right? 44%. So, what we're seeing with Trump is, I think Carrie is right, they are ignoring his comments about, for example, Mexicans as rapists, and they are focused more on the policies. Many of these people who are moving into the middle class are small business owners. They like the fact that regulations have been decreased under Trump, and they like the fact that the economy has done well until the pandemic, and they benefited from that.
But can we also talk about how much Trump also shoots himself in the foot? This older voting bloc, we can try to talk about and approach Trump as normal as possible, but the fact of that this pandemic happened on his watch. Over 200,000 Americans are dead, more than World War II, more than the Vietnam War. And it doesn't matter how people try to spin this, that responsibility is on him. And then he tried to go after the UPS and mail-in voting, which a lot of, obviously, we know senior Americans prefer to vote that way. So going after the integrity of the election, gaslighting Americans about the pandemic, when we have the highest infection rates, one of the highest infection rates in the world, struggling to see the richest country in the world give their medical staff basic PPEs. Let's not forget what happened leading us here, and all the mismanagement and then the gaslighting.
Wait a second. A pandemic is obviously huge with seniors, but Anushay, what about the Republican Party and defunding Social Security or privatizing Social Security. How big of a deal is that to senior voters?
Well, obviously that's a really big issue as well, but I was saying with the amount of people that we don't even actually have the numbers of the amount of people that were dying in American nursing homes. So of course there's specific issues which are really important to senior citizens, but they did have a very specific impact from this pandemic as well.
I sort of want to add on to that, the senior voter point that's been made here, but I think is also another interesting factor for them is the fact that they're the hardest hit by this pandemic. Outside of Black and Brown Americans of whatever age, seniors, especially if they're high risk, especially if they're in nursing homes, assisted living facilities, they're one of the harder hit demographics across race by this pandemic. And the fact that, quite frankly, some of them can't see their grandkids, right? Because of this pandemic. So they're looking around. I know Carrie wanted to say, like, this election is, being posed as a referendum on Trump. I mean, quite honestly, because he's running for re-election, it is. It's like, do you want more of the same of what you are in now? Or do you want to try something different for the next 4 years? And senior voters, that's why his numbers are looking a little shaky in Florida and other places where he's been pretty strong with senior voters, is because they're like, listen, I want to see my grandkids. Like, I'm tired of hearing about my friends dying, my friends getting sick. Yeah. I got a father-in-law who's literally sitting with my mother-in-law who has dementia, but he can't leave and go a lot of places because if he does, he's exposing himself who's already high risk. These are the concerns of senior voters. So I think that's part of why those numbers have been changing for they have.
Okay, wonderful, thanks. That's it for this edition. Please join us on the web at www.tothecontrary.org and follow us on Instagram and Facebook. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, please join us next time.